Okay, I'm actually gonna talk about Nietzsche unironically, and I'll try to sound smart, even though I'm not. Nietzsche had an interesting opinion about self control. Imagine two men who feel like they've been having too much sex and want to practice abstinence. The first man decides he's going to stop. He's still going to experience the desire, he's still going to have the impulse, but he is going to learn how to govern it. The second man decides he's done with the whole problem. He eliminates his ability to have sex altogether. Two men, same goal, completely different approaches. And Nietzsche thought the difference between them mattered. Because for Nietzsche, there was something fundamentally important about what happens when you don't simply eradicate a passion, but instead learn what to do with it. And to understand why, we have to take his idea seriously for a moment. Nietzsche uses castration as an extreme image for a broader approach to passion, extirpation. The idea is that when a desire becomes difficult to control, you can attack it at its roots. You don't learn to govern the passion, you try to get rid of the passion itself. And Nietzsche is deeply suspicious of this approach. In Twilight of the Idols, when he is criticizing the Christian treatment of passion, he contrasts this kind of castration with asking how a desire might instead be spiritualized, beautified, or deified. In other words, the alternative isn't simply to indulge the desire, it is to transform your relationship with it, to take something powerful and bring it under your command. Nietzsche sees the need to eradicate a passion as a possible sign of weakness, because it can mean that you don't know how to live with the passion without being ruled by it. And this is where his idea of strength becomes important. For Nietzsche, having a powerful desire isn't necessarily the problem. The interesting question is whether you're capable of governing it. Can you experience the impulse without becoming its servant? Can you take something powerful inside yourself and give it a direction? Can you give your erection a direction? No, that's too much. But that's the kind of self-mastery Nietzsche finds admirable. The passion is still there, but now you're the one holding the reins. And the more you think about Nietzsche's argument, the more difficult it becomes to dismiss. Because there really is something impressive about being able to govern something that has power over you. Imagine someone with an incredibly powerful temper. He gets angry easily. He feels the impulse to lash out. He can feel the anger building inside of him. But instead of needing to destroy his capacity for anger, he learns how to control it. He can feel the anger without becoming its slave. He can use that energy differently. He can decide what deserves his anger, when to express it, and when to let it go. There's a difference between being free of a powerful impulse and being capable of governing a powerful impulse. And Nietzsche places a lot of value on the second. Because if something is powerful, and you can still command yourself in its presence, you've demonstrated something about your own strength. You haven't made the desire disappear. You've learned to stand above it. And from Nietzsche's perspective, that's a much more interesting achievement. But here is where things get kind of twisted. Let's imagine two armies preparing for a battle. The first army has a very particular idea of what it means to be a warrior. They believe they're strong, they're fearless, they're brave, and they don't want to win by avoiding the fight or hiding behind clever tactics. They want to fight, head on. Give them swords, spears, maybe even clubs, and send them straight at the enemy. No tricks, no retreat. Their commander tells them, "We're going to show them what we're made of. We're going to overwhelm them with strength, courage, and sheer ferocity." And there is something admirable about that. The soldiers aren't afraid of the battlefield. They aren't looking for an easier fight. They're willing to meet the enemy directly and prove what they're capable of. Now imagine the army on the other side. This army's commander has a very different philosophy. He doesn't care about proving how strong his soldiers are. He cares about winning. So his soldiers study the terrain. They flank the enemy, they set ambushes, they attack from unexpected directions. They use whatever legitimate advantages are available to them. They have better weapons, they have better intelligence, they use rifles, armored vehicles, aircraft, whatever gives them an advantage. And if they can defeat the enemy without exposing a single soldier unnecessarily, even better. They're not interested in proving that they are the strongest warriors on the battlefield. They're interested in defeating the other army. That's it. And eventually the two armies meet. The first army charges exactly as planned, and the second army does exactly what it was designed to do. It surrounds them, it cuts off their retreat, it attacks from positions they never expected, and before long, the first army is completely destroyed. After the battle, the two commanders meet. The first commander looks at the opposing commander and says, "Your soldiers aren't real warriors. You didn't fight fair. You hid behind your weapons. You used ambushes. You attacked from a distance. You never gave us a proper fight." And the other commander looks at him and says, "You're right. But who cares? Your army lost." The first commander is furious. "Of course we lost. You had better weapons. You had better tactics. You didn't even give us a chance to prove our strength." And the other commander just shrugs. "I wasn't trying to prove how strong we are. I was trying to win." And this is where the analogy starts to mess with the way we normally think about discipline. Because why exactly should we admire the person who deliberately makes the battle harder for himself? If the goal is to accomplish something, why should the difficulty of accomplishing it automatically make the accomplishment more valuable? And this is where I think we need to step outside Nietzsche's particular hierarchy for a moment. Because Nietzsche has given us a compelling reason to admire strength. But strength isn't the only thing a person can be good at. What happens if we stop measuring only strength? What about the person who makes a decision so firmly that he refuses to leave himself a way back? That's resolve. What about the person who commits to that decision even when he starts missing the thing he gave up? That's commitment. And what about the person who looks at his own weaknesses honestly and says, "I know myself, I know what happens when I give myself this opportunity, so I'm not going to keep giving myself the opportunity"? That is conviction, that is wisdom. And what about the person who looks at the situation and thinks 3 steps ahead? Who doesn't just ask, "How strong am I?" but "How can I arrange this so I don't have to rely on strength in the first place?" That's strategy. These are different virtues, and I don't see why we have to assume that one of them automatically sits above the others. Sometimes the most impressive thing you can do is withstand something difficult. Sometimes the impressive thing is having enough self-knowledge to realize that repeatedly putting yourself in the same situation is stupid. Sometimes it's having the resolve to close the door behind you. And sometimes it's simply being clever enough to find a better route to the same destination. Take something much more ordinary. Let's say you want to lose weight. You could keep all the junk food in your house and tell yourself, "I'm going to prove that I can resist it." Or you could throw it away. Stop buying it. Change your routine. Don't walk past the bakery every morning. Don't keep the thing you know you're going to eat when you're tired sitting 3 feet away from you. You haven't demonstrated that you're stronger than the temptation. That's true. But you've demonstrated something else. You've looked at the problem honestly and changed the conditions under which you're trying to solve it. And if the goal is to lose weight, why should I automatically consider the first person more admirable? He had a harder fight, fine. But the second person may have understood the problem better. He may have recognized his own weaknesses and designed his life around them. That's not necessarily weakness. That can be strategy. And strategy can be a virtue too, if you let it. But there's another side to this. Sometimes keeping the temptation around isn't even about discipline. Sometimes it's an excuse. You tell yourself, "I'm going to keep the junk food in the house. I'm going to prove that I can resist it." And maybe you genuinely believe that. But what if some part of you wants the junk food to be there? Maybe you like knowing that there's a way out. Maybe you want to be able to tell yourself you're practicing discipline while secretly preserving the possibility of indulging. And that's where strategic self-control can become valuable. Because if you know yourself well enough to recognize that, you might say, no, I'm not going to keep giving myself this negotiation. You could throw it all away. You could stop buying it, change the route you take home, remove the opportunity. You're not saying, I'll resist this every time it appears. You're saying, I'm going to stop putting myself in situations where I have to make that decision over and over again. And that can require a lot of conviction. You're giving something up, you're closing a door, and you might still want what's behind it. So I'm not arguing that eliminating temptation is somehow the same thing as mastering the desire. It isn't. I'm asking a different question. Why should mastering the desire automatically be considered the superior achievement? But there's a weakness in my argument. I've been talking as if we can simply construct our lives however we want. We can't. You can build a perfect environment for yourself and then leave it for a week. You can travel somewhere. You can have a terrible day. You can become stressed, exhausted, lonely, angry. Someone else can put the temptation directly in front of you. Something can happen that completely throws your routine apart. And suddenly, the environment you carefully constructed doesn't exist anymore. The food is there, the temptation is right in front of you, and now you have to make a decision. This is where strategy reaches its limit. Because if all of my discipline depends on having the right environment, what happens when the environment isn't right? I can't always choose the battlefield. Sometimes I'm going to end up somewhere I didn't expect to be. And when that happens, I still need to be able to fight. And this is where Epictetus comes in. The Stoics had a different reason for practicing self-control. They understood something that my argument was missing. You don't control the battlefield. You can arrange your life as carefully as you want, but eventually circumstances are going to put you somewhere you didn't choose. That's why Epictetus sometimes recommended deliberately practicing small acts of self-denial. There is a funny exercise he came up with where when you're thirsty, you can take some water into your mouth and then spit it out, which sounds completely ridiculous. You're thirsty, there's water, just drink the damn water. Ah, but that's precisely the point, Epictetus would say. For a moment, you're deliberately putting yourself in a situation where you experience a desire and choose not to satisfy it. You're practicing. You're reminding yourself that an impulse can exist without automatically becoming an order. And I think this is where Epictetus gives us something valuable. He's not telling us that we should constantly make our lives harder just to prove how strong we are. He's preparing us for the fact that sometimes life is going to make things hard for us anyway. You won't always have your perfect environment. You won't always have your carefully constructed battlefield. So maybe it's worth occasionally stepping onto an uncomfortable battlefield of your own choosing, just to make sure you still know how to fight when the battlefield chooses you. So maybe these aren't competing forms of discipline after all. There's value in learning how to resist something you can't avoid, and there's value in knowing when you shouldn't have to fight the same battle unnecessarily. If I know that a particular environment is going to make me fail, there's nothing inherently noble about staying there just to prove that I can resist. I can change the environment. I can remove the temptation. I can make the decision easier for myself. There's no shame in that. But I also don't want to become so dependent on that environment that the moment it changes, I completely lose control. Because eventually, I'm going to find myself somewhere I didn't choose. So perhaps the answer is simpler than choosing one side. Build a battlefield when you can, learn how to fight when you can't. And maybe good discipline isn't about making every battle as difficult as possible. Maybe it's about knowing which battles are worth fighting. And maybe that's what I find most interesting about Nietzsche's idea. He made me notice how easily we can turn difficulty into a virtue. We see someone voluntarily making something harder for themselves, overcoming it, and we think, wow, that's impressive. And sometimes it is. But difficulty isn't automatically evidence of virtue. Sometimes the difficult thing is exactly what you should practice. And sometimes you're just making your own life harder for no reason. Nietzsche is right about something important. There really is a kind of strength in being able to experience a powerful desire without becoming its servant. That's worth developing. But I don't think it follows that strength is therefore the highest virtue involved in accomplishing a goal. Sometimes you need strength. Sometimes you need strategy. Sometimes you need conviction. Sometimes you need resolve. And sometimes you need enough self-knowledge to know which one of these you need at the moment. Because if eliminating the temptation is sometimes the best way to succeed, then where exactly does strength stop being a virtue and become an unnecessary obstacle you've created for yourself? Maybe willpower isn't overrated because it has no value. Maybe it's overrated when we start confusing the difficulty of the battle with the quality of the victory. But anyways, that's all I have to say for that matter. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.